first writing grammar rule. This is page 13 of the writing manual. Subject-verb agreement is by far one of our most important writing grammar rules because it is one of the most common rules that shows up on the test. So first of all, what is subject-verb agreement? Well, it says right here what subject-verb agreement is. Subjects and verbs must agree in number. You might want to grab a highlighter, and it's not a very straight highlight, but you might want to grab a highlighter and highlight this stuff. We have to make sure that our verbs and our subjects match, that depending upon whether the subject is singular or plural, the sentence's verb accurately reflects whether that subject is singular or plural. If we take a look at example 1, we'll see a relatively straightforward example of subject-verb agreement. Go ahead and read through example 1. If you want to pause the video at any point to read a sentence through and try to do the example on your own, that's perfectly fine. So example 1 says, the Voting Rights Act provide for extensive federal oversight of elections. So we would have to ask ourselves, what is the subject of this verb provide? And the answer to that question is that the subject of that verb provide is this word act. That word act is singular, yet provide would be the form of the verb that we would use for plural subjects. So we have a lack of agreement here. This subject act and this verb provide, they do not agree. The sentence should read, the Voting Rights Act provides for extensive federal oversight of election. Now we have the right form of the verb for our singular subject act. Now before we move on, one thing that you might want to take note of, this does confuse some students in English when we go from singular to plural. So singular to plural. In our nouns, we add an S to pluralize a singular noun. So in our nouns, we go from dog to dogs. No S to an S. In our verbs, and again, this can be tricky for some people, in our verbs, we would say something like he eats. Notice that he is singular, and on this singular verb we have this S, and then when we switch to a plural subject such as they, notice that the S gets dropped. So back to example 1, we had to add an S to make our verb match the singular subject. That can be a little bit tricky for students, but hopefully with practice you can get over any hesitation you have on that issue. So again, subject-verb agreements errors, by far one of the most common errors on the SAT. On every single SAT you're going to see at least a couple, if not more, subject-verb agreement errors. So let's talk about our visual tip-off clue. This is how we know that ETS might be testing us on subject-verb agreement, and that is if we see underlined verbs. So if you see an underlined verb, that's a tip-off that subject-verb agreement might be being tested. In these two numbers right here, what we're going to do is we're going to write down what we need to do every time we see an underlined verb. The first thing that we need to do is we need to find the subject. For many of you, that might be very simple. I'll give you guys a little hint. You can ask yourself, and if you want to write this down, you can ask yourself who or what, and then just insert the verb into this blank, who or what, and then insert the verb. So back to example 1, the verb is provide, so what you would ask yourself is who or what provide for extensive federal oversight of elections. Who or what is providing for extensive federal oversight? The answer is the act. The act is doing the providing. So the answer to this question, who or what verb, the answer to that question will be your subject, will be the subject of the sentence. So that's your first goal, is to find the subject, and your second goal is determine if the subject is singular or plural. So pretty basic goals here. Finding the subject, determining if the subject is singular or plural. That's the key to subject-verb agreement. Unfortunately, the test writers have ways of making those two seemingly simple things much more difficult. So we need to talk about a bunch of different aspects and variations of subject-verb agreement, one of which deals with finding the subject. So again, our two goals were finding the subject, and I'm going to actually go ahead and highlight that. Finding the subject and then determining if it is singular or plural. So the first thing we need to go into a little bit more detail on is finding the subject. Take a look at example 2 again. If you want to pause and read example 2 and see if you can spot any issues, go ahead. In example 2, we've got this really long, convoluted sentence. The humorous and personal themes in the student's most recent collection of poems, which included a lighthearted condemnation of his mother, blah, 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 blah. Some of you may have noticed that this verb right here is actually incorrect. This is not supposed to be was. It is supposed to be were. And the reason that that verb is supposed to be were is that the subject that governs that verb is all the way back here. The subject that governs that verb is themes. Everything from this in all the way to this cooking, all the way to this comma, everything in those brackets is completely irrelevant to determining what verb you need. And this is what ETS, the test writer, will tend to do. They will tend to include these separating phrases, these phrases that put a lot of distance between our subject and our verb. And in those phrases, notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4 nouns. 1, 2, 3, 4 nouns. One is singular, another is plural, another is singular, another is singular. So we have a bunch of nouns. We have some that are singular and some that are plural. And then we have our main noun, our most important noun in terms of determining what the verb should be. We have our most important noun, themes, here. That guy is plural. So all told, we have 5 nouns before the verb. We have 2 that are plural, 3 that are singular, so that by the time we get to this verb, we have a difficult time remembering or knowing for sure what noun was supposed to govern that verb. So this is known as separation, separators. This is what ETS will do. They will put these phrases, these separating phrases, in the sentence. They put distance between the subject and the verb. They have additional nouns and pronouns that are going to distract you from what the verb should be. So what we need to do is we need to get really good at bracketing. Well, first we need to get good at spotting separators, and then we need to get good at bracketing them, and then we need to get good at ignoring them. And so anyway, if you look at example 3, in example 3, you can, and again, pause the video if you need to and see if you can catch an error if there is one. Indeed, there is an error here. This has is not supposed to be has, it's supposed to be have. Why is the has supposed to be have? Because our subject here is candies, and we don't say that candies has flavors, we say that candies have flavors. This little in the bowl, this little prepositional phrase, we'll talk more about those in one moment. This little in the bowl is just separator. It's just putting a little bit of distance between candies and has. However, in this sentence, if somebody came up to you and said the candies in the bowl has flavors, you would most likely, with your ear alone, be able to detect that error. ETS knows that students can often detect subject-verb agreement errors even in the presence of a separator, which is why they're going to make the separators a little bit more tricky, a little bit more subtle. They're going to make it very difficult for your ear to detect the separator, but you can get around that trick, you can get around that difficulty by visually learning visually to spot your separators, to know what separators look like and spot them with your eyes rather than your ears. So let's talk about our separators. The first, actually, I'm going to just list them right here. The three separators: number one, prep phrases. Number two, prep phrases. Number two, appositives. Don't be scared by that terminology. I'll explain to you what an appositive is. And the third separator, who, which, that clauses. So prepositional phrases, they are by far the most common. We're going to start with those. What is a prepositional phrase? A prepositional phrase is simply a phrase that starts with a preposition, has a noun after the preposition. So that of is the prep. The errors is a noun. It is also known as the object of the preposition. And the of the errors together, the preposition and the noun after the preposition, is known as a prep phrase. Now, what do prep phrases do? What prep phrases do is they add detail to things in the sentence. So this phrase right here is basically answering the question, what frequency are we talking about? We're talking about the frequency of the errors. So this of the errors, this prep phrase here, is simply describing frequency. Now here's the deal. Sure, it's nice to have detail in our sentences, but when we're trying to determine what the correct verb is based on the subject, we really just need to know what the subject is in order to determine what the verb is. We do not need to worry about any what end up being irrelevant details. So what we're going to do is we're going to bracket this prepositional phrase. And it does say up here, you're going to open your bracket at the preposition. Frequently, but not always, your bracket will close after the object of that preposition, after the noun following the preposition. And then we're going to read the sentence without that description, without that prepositional phrase. So the sentence becomes the frequency blank alarming. Well, what would we say? Would we say the frequency is alarming, or would we say the frequency are alarming? Hopefully you said that you would say the frequency is alarming. Frequency is our subject. It is a singular subject. We need a singular verb. The fact that errors, the object of the preposition, was a plural noun had absolutely 100% no bearing whatsoever on the verb. So just because errors is a plural noun and it's bumped right up next to this verb does not mean we should be saying the errors are alarming, because what this sentence is actually intending to convey is the idea that the frequency is alarming, not that the errors themselves are alarming. Hopefully that all makes sense. Over here you do have most of the more common prepositions you'll see on the SAT. Whenever you see any of these words, those words would be a sign that you should start your bracketed material. Where your bracket ends, that'll take some practice. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Before we move on to the examples, you should jot down this rule. The noun after a preposition can never be the subject of a verb. The noun after a preposition can never be the subject of a verb. Remember that the noun after the preposition is the object of the preposition. It is not the subject of a verb. In the examples below, we are doing three things. We are bracketing separators, we are circling the subject of the verb, and then we're going to circle the correct verb, of course. If you want to do these on your own, and I recommend that you do, press pause and then come back and join us after you are done. Example 2, the paint color on the walls and ceilings needs to be changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to spot this preposition. We're going to start our bracket there. Now be careful of ending your bracket after walls. This preposition on actually has two objects, walls and ceilings, both plural nouns. I'm going to end my bracket after ceilings, and then what I'm going to do, the whole point of bracketing that separator, is then to read the sentence without the separator, and most likely we will be able to tell very easily what verb we need. The paint color, so there's our subject. The color, we would not say the color need, we would say the color needs to be changed. This is a singular subject. We need a singular verb. The color needs to be changed. Example number 3. My low grades in chemistry blank me to meet with my professor. So we have got one prepositional phrase right here. It ends after chemistry. We have another prepositional phrase here that ends after professor. So we read the sentence again without those separators. My low grades blank me to meet. So grades, there's my subject. Grades, I would say grades require. We have a plural subject. We need a plural verb. One note on this question before we move on to example 3. I just want to make a note about this to right here. Some of you may have bracketed that to. The word to can either be a preposition if it is followed by a noun. Okay, so in this case the to is a preposition. But if the to is followed by a verb, then that whole thing is an infinitive. And that to, in this second case, that to is not a preposition. We do not want to bracket infinitives. We only want to bracket or start bracketing before a to when we have a noun after the to. In other words, when the to is a preposition. So again, do not bracket your infinitives. If you have a verb after a to, do not bracket the to phrase. Example 4. Ponds in Jake's backyard, blah, blah, blah. So here we have a preposition that starts a prepositional phrase. But notice we have another sort of interrupting or separating phrase here. So I'm actually not going to end my bracket after the backyard, which is the object of the preposition in. I'm going to end my bracket all the way over here after problem, because all of this stuff in between ponds, which is my subject, and the verb over here, all of that stuff in the brackets is separator. By the way, you do have another preposition, this with right here, so we can bracket that with algae. So the ponds has or have become overrun. We would say the ponds have become overrun. We have a plural subject. We need a plural verb. So that's examples 2, 3, and 4. Now, hopefully this point is obvious, but if it's not, let me just go over it real quickly. After you bracket your separators, you do want to make sure that you read through the sentence without the separators, so that you make sure everything makes sense. If you read through your sentence without your separators and something doesn't sound right, in other words, it sounds like you're missing a subject or missing a verb, or something doesn't transition nicely, it might be a sign that you have not bracketed enough, or that you have bracketed too much. In other words, you've gotten your bracketing wrong, you've gotten your separators wrong. So, if you take a look at example 4, without the bracketed material, the sentence boils down to the ponds have become overrun. Sounds perfectly fine. That's probably a good indicator that you have gotten all of your separators correct. Now, there are a couple of tricky prepositions that will show up, and they do tend to lead students to certain doom. Just kidding. These prepositions, as well as along with and in addition to, the reason that these prepositions are slightly tricky is because they don't look like all of the other prepositions, because all of the other prepositions that we've talked about are really short 2, 3, 4 letter words, and these prepositions are actually phrases. However, these 3 phrases indeed are prepositions, and we can start a bracket at these phrases and end the bracket wherever we need to. So in the following example 5, we are doing 3 things: bracketing separator, circling subject, circling verb. Example 5, go ahead and do it on your own. In example 5, we have the most populous region as well as many isolated areas, blank monsoonal thunderstorms that often cause widespread flooding. So again, remember what we said, as well as is a preposition. We can start our bracket there. We can end the bracket after isolated areas, which would be the object of that preposition. We read the sentence again: the most populous region, so there's our subject. The region experiences monsoonal thunderstorms. So we have a singular subject. We need the singular verb. Do remember one more time that in English our singular verbs have S's on them, so that's why we need the region experiences. That was example 5. So that's your prepositional phrase separator. Separator number 2, appositives. Don't get intimidated by the terminology here. All an appositive is this. I'm going to go ahead and highlight the definition up here. An appositive is simply a noun or a noun phrase that renames another noun beside it. You actually probably use appositives multiple times every day. When you say something like my brother, I don't know why brother is capitalized, but when you say my brother Josh, notice that this Josh is just a noun that refers to or replaces brother. So Josh is an appositive. Josh is another noun that is renaming or replacing the noun right next to it. So like I said, you use appositives all day, every day of your lives. On the SAT, how will appositives look? Well, they'll look like this. So notice that in this sentence, the film, a series of short flashbacks, blank, highly praised. So what we have is we have this little noun phrase that is also an appositive, because it is simply renaming or describing or adding detail to the film, which actually is the subject of our sentence. This is the subject. The stuff that is in this appositive is separator. We can bracket the noun phrase, we can bracket the appositive, we reread the sentence: the film have been or has been highly praised. The film has been highly praised. We would not say the film have been highly praised. Again, notice that we have this plural noun inside the separator, inside the appositive, that's bumped right up next to the verb. So it appears as if flashbacks have been highly praised. That would actually sound perfectly fine. However, the noun inside our appositive, just like the noun inside a prepositional phrase, will not have any bearing on the verb. The only noun that's important here in terms of determining our verb is this film, which is singular, so we need a singular verb. So again, appositives just add detail to the subject. They do not have any bearing on the verb. So we can bracket them, read the sentence without them, and a lot of times we'll be able to see what form of the verb we need. In example 7, same thing as always. We are bracketing separators. We are circling subjects. We are circling the correct verb. Go ahead and do number 7. In example 7, we have the insect, a beetle with large barbs on its legs. So notice this is an appositive phrase. This is a noun phrase centered around this noun beetle, and that noun phrase is just renaming the insect, which is the subject of our sentence. The insect climbs the tree with ease. There is another prepositional phrase separator at the end of this sentence that we could bracket. Now back up to this little tip-off clue up here. Appositives almost always come between commas. They don't have to come between commas, but they very frequently do. So that's another good tip-off that you're dealing with an appositive phrase. If you see a phrase between commas, you very often can just start your bracket at the first comma, end your bracket at the second comma, and you will have accurately bracketed a separator. Our third separator, who, which, that clauses. A who, which, that clause is also separator. Who, which, that clauses do the same thing as prep phrases and appositives. They just add extra detail to our sentences or to our subject, so we can bracket them and ignore them when we are trying to determine the correct form of the verb. So in examples 8 and 9, we are doing same thing as always, bracketing separators, circling subject, circling correct verb. Go ahead and do 8, 9, and 10 right now. So in example 8, we have their language. Then here's this which clause that would signal the start of our separator. We're going to end the separator. We're going to end our bracket after clicks. Notice that a who, which, that clause is also sometimes marked off by commas, just like our appositive was. So that's a perfectly acceptable way to spot a who, which, that clause. To just think of it as a phrase between commas, very similar to the appositive. So this sentence boils down to their language. Language is the subject. Their language resembles no other language in the world. In the world is also a separator that could be bracketed. So again, their language resembles no other language. We have a singular subject. We need a singular verb. Example 9, the group of ponds. So there's a preposition. So we're going to start our separator there. We might be tempted to end our separator here, and that'd be perfectly fine as long as we spot that we need to pick another separator back up at the that. Remember, who, which, that clauses are separators. So instead of drawing 2 brackets in here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to draw my ending bracket after the that clause. So now I have the group. That's my subject. And the appropriate verb here would be attracts. Group is a singular subject. I need a singular verb, attracts. So the group attracts tourists seeking a picturesque backdrop. There's another separator back here that we could bracket. That's example 8 and 9. And then on example 10, again, if you want to do it on your own, go ahead. In example 10, what we see is this idea that who, which, and that clauses. There's actually a couple of different clauses and phrases that extend other separators, but who, which, and that clauses do sometimes extend other separators. So what we have here is this preposition. We have the noun paintings after the preposition, so that's the object of the preposition. Again, we might be tempted to end our bracket after paintings. However, this which comes in and starts a clause that adds detail to paintings. What paintings are we talking about? We're talking about paintings which are now on display at several local museums. So I'm not going to end my bracket after paintings. I'm going to capture that entire which clause that describes paintings. Again, if you had put 2 brackets in here, one there, that would have been fine. Not necessary, but perfectly fine. So now we read the sentence without the separator. The style does not appeal to all viewers. We actually have another prep phrase separator once again at the end. So the style does not appeal. So we have a singular subject. We need a singular verb. Those are your separators. Once again, remember 3 separators: prepositional phrases, appositives, who, which, that clauses. You need to make sure that you can spot those things. You always start your bracket at the preposition or at the first comma if you're dealing with an appositive, or at the who, which, or that word itself. And then finding out where to end your bracket, like I said, it's going to take a little bit of practice, which you will get when you do the homework. The separators are the first way that ETS can make it difficult to find your subject. The second way is that subjects can come after verbs. Subjects do not have to come before verbs, although that's the most common place that subjects will come. There is a tip-off clue for this particular variation of subject-verb agreement, and it is if you see there, the word there, plus a verb. So as an example, if you want to jot these down, if you see something like there seems, or you see something like there are, those phrases would tell you that your subject is after the verb. ETS doesn't have to give you that tip-off clue, but that is the most common of the tip-off clues that will indicate this particular variation of subject-verb agreement. We're going to do examples 1 and 2. Same thing as always, same directions. You're bracketing separators, you're circling subjects, you're circling the correct verb. Do examples 1 and 2 on your own. Example 1. In the box containing the items, there is/are a leaflet that warns of possible choking hazards. So we have a bunch of separators here. Prepositional phrase there. Don't end your bracket here because containing the items describes the box. So we are going to capture containing the items inside our in the box prepositional phrase separator. We also have a that clause right here, a that clause and another preposition. So this sentence boils down to there blank a leaflet. So what's the subject? Well, remember we said when we see there and then a verb, there is or there are, the subject is going to be after the verb. So our subject here is leaflet. Therefore, our verb needs to be is. A leaflet is there in the box containing the items. So subject after the verb, subject is leaflet, verb needs to be is. Example 2, again, this is not the tip-off clue that we just discussed. The tip-off clue that we just discussed was this there plus the verb. In example 2, we actually have a slightly different situation. Let's take a look at example 2. Note that it does begin with a prepositional phrase, so we are going to bracket from the ceiling. So notice that eliminates any noun before the verb as our subject. There are no nouns before the verb that can be our subject. So obviously we're going to be looking after the verb for our subject, and the subject happens to be right there. The mobiles hang from the ceiling. The most colorful mobiles hang from the ceiling. So this is a plural subject after the verb. We need a plural verb, and we are done with subject after verb. Now, remember from our first page of subject-verb agreement, we said that our two goals were, once we see an underlined verb, we need to find the subject, we need to determine if the subject is singular or plural. We just talked about all the ways that ETS can make it tough to find the subject. Now we need to talk about the ways that ETS might make it a little bit difficult to determine if the subject is singular or plural. It seems a little weird to think that they could make it difficult to determine whether the subject is singular or plural. After all, if you see dog, you know that you're dealing with a singular subject. If you see dogs, you're dealing with a plural subject. But there are many pronouns and nouns in the English language that you can't tell whether they're singular or plural just by looking at them. You just have to know some associated rules. So we've got to talk about my favorite acronym of all time, the ENOBs. The ENOBs stand for each, either, neither, ones, and I know I'm spelling this word oddly. Don't worry, I'm doing it for a reason. Ones and bodies. Each, either, neither, ones and bodies. Each, either, neither, ones and bodies. I would say that to yourself like 20 or 30 times until you have it down. Each, either, neither, ones, bodies. All right, I'll just do it 3 times. I won't do it 20 or 30 times. So with the ones and the bodies, the each, the either, and the neither are self-explanatory. With the ones and the bodies, we're talking about the words like these. We're talking about words like someone, somebody, anyone, anybody, everyone, everybody, no one, nobody. The words that end with one or body. What we need to know about the ENOBs on the SAT is that the ENOBs are always singular. This is the rule you need to write down. It's the rule you need to memorize. The ENOBs are always singular. So if you see one of these 5 words or types of words on the SAT, as a subject, the subject is singular and the verb needs to be singular. In examples 3, 4, and 5, same as always, we are bracketing separators. We are circling the subject. We are circling the correct verb. Go ahead and do examples 3, 4, and 5 on your own right now. So in example 3, neither of the packages have/has arrived as of this afternoon. So notice that we do have a prepositional phrase separator here, beginning with this preposition of and ending with the object of the preposition packages. So I'm going to bracket that. I'm also going to bracket as of this afternoon. That is also a prepositional phrase separator. So what we're left with is the subject neither. And then remember, we said that neither is singular. Well, which of these two verbs will we use with a singular subject? We would use has. Neither has arrived. Now, some of you get tripped up by this. Some of you think that to your ear, neither have arrived sounds just as good, if not better. And I don't know, to my ear, it doesn't sound great. If you are struggling with sound, one of the things you can do is, as soon as you spot an enob, just replace the enob with it, a singular pronoun. Since we know the enobs are singular, we can replace the enob with a singular pronoun. You could even replace it with a singular noun, like boy, and then ask yourself what verb you would use with it or boy. Would you say it have or it has? Would you say boy, the boy have, or the boy has? Hopefully everyone said you would say has for both of those subjects. So again, if you're having a little bit of trouble with the enobs, since we know the enobs are singular, just replace the enob with it or boy, a singular pronoun or a singular noun, and a lot of times you'll be able to tell which verb form you need. Example 4, of the proposed changes as well as their possible outcomes. This is all separator. We've got a preposition there. We've got a phrase between commas there. So our subject is obviously each. Each is singular. For a singular subject, we would say each is acceptable. Down here in example 5, we've got a who, which, that clause, a who clause in this case. So we're going to bracket that who clause. It is unimportant. It is separator, so our subject becomes everyone, each, either, neither, ones, and bodies. So that's one of the ones. So everyone is singular. Everyone was. There's the singular, 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 singular. There is another prepositional phrase back here at the end of the sentence that we can bracket. So once again, the enobs, they are always singular. If you see an enob as your subject, that subject is singular and your verb must also be singular. Now we move on to another way that ETS might make it a little bit tough for us to determine if our subject is singular or plural. We have to talk about compound subjects. Now, just to check back in on the page number here, we are on page 17. Page 17, just in case you lost your page. So compound subjects, what is a compound subject? Well, the definition is right here. Compound subject is made up of two or more nouns or pronouns joined by a conjunction. The conjunction that joins the two subjects is going to be the key to determining what subject what verb you need, whether your subject is singular or plural, and what verb you need. So let's go ahead and write down the major tip-off clues for this particular variation of the rule. So let's write down compound subject. And again, remember that a compound subject is just that, subject made up of two or more nouns or pronouns joined by a conjunction. So a compound subject joined by and. If you see a compound subject joined by and, like the cat and the dog, or Mark and I. So two nouns, cat, dog, noun and a pronoun, Mark, I, joined by and. The rule is subject is plural. Verb must be plural. Compound subject joined by and, subject's plural, verb has to be plural. With a compound subject joined by or nor, and that's what we're going to write here as the tip-off clue, compound subject joined by or / nor. Compound subject joined by or nor. This rule is slightly trickier. The verb must agree with the second subject. So if I had something like the dog or the cats. Okay, so notice we've got two nouns, one, two. One of the nouns is singular, one of the nouns is plural. If the verb were here, this second subject, the cats, the plural subject, would determine that the verb needs to be plural. So the dog or the cats are. Now, if these two subjects were flipped and the sentence became the cats or the dog, then it would be the cats or the dog is. Since the dog would be the second subject and the dog is singular, we would then need a singular verb. Examples 6 and 7, same directions as always. We are bracketing separators. We are circling subjects. We are circling verbs. Go ahead and do 6 and 7 now. In example 6, I'm going to start my bracket at the first comma, end my bracket at the second comma, phrase between commas, separator, subject becomes, subject is, Jason and his colleague. So notice, two nouns, separated by and, compound subject, joined by and, we use the plural verb. Jason and his colleague approve. Of the story is actually a prep phrase, so we can bracket it and ignore it. Jason and his colleague would be a plural subject. We need the plural verb. Example 7. This guy is a bit tricky. A lot of students make the mistake of bracketing all of this material from in all the way to shoes, and unfortunately that is a mistake because we actually have two separators here. One is a prep phrase starting with in and ending at pocket. The other is a prep phrase starting at on and ending with shoes. And then what we see is that we actually have a compound subject, one noun, two nouns, joined by this or in the middle. The second subject is the metal, and that indeed is a singular subject, so we need a singular verb. The metal is causing the alarm to sound. Tricky sentence. Got to make sure that you're really on your toes about what's separator and what's not separator and what's a compound subject and so on and so forth. So that is yet another way that ETS might make it difficult for us to know whether we need a singular or plural verb, compound subjects. And finally, the last way that ETS might make determining whether we need a singular or plural verb a little bit more difficult is with collective nouns. The collective nouns are just nouns that describe a group of people or things. Some examples are given here next to this. Eyeball, the family, the group, the jury, the audience. These are all nouns that describe a group of people or things. On the SAT, the rule is, go ahead and write it down, always singular. The collective nouns as subjects on the SAT are singular subjects. If you see a collective noun as your subject, the verb has to agree with a singular subject. Examples 8 and 9, our final two examples. You're going to bracket separators, circle subjects, circle verbs. Go ahead and do them on your own. In example 8, we have the audience. Then we have a separator, phrase between commas. The audience only, audience is a collective noun, that is our subject. We said collective nouns are singular, so we need the verb that goes along with the singular subject, which in this case is applauds. The audience only applauds when someone falls off stage. That is a really evil audience. That's really mean. Anyway, example 9, we are going to bracket despite a few losses because that is prepositional phrase separator. Despite is a preposition in this case. Then we have the coaches and the team. Now, students sometimes get fooled into thinking that because team is bumped up right next to this verb, and team is a collective noun, they think team is singular, therefore I need the singular verb is. However, what you actually have here is you have a compound subject joined by, so here's your two nouns in the compound subject, the coaches and the team. You have a compound subject joined by and. That is going to supersede the fact that you have this singular team. You have a plural subject made up of multiple coaches and the team, so you need the plural verb here, are. The coaches and the team are confident, not the coaches and the team is confident. That is it for subject-verb agreement. Again, subject-verb agreement is extremely important. It is going to appear several times on every test. You have to know all the different ways that ETS can make it tough to find the subject. You have to know all the different, that's with separators and subject after verb. You have to know the different kinds of ways that ETS will make it tough to determine if the subject is singular or plural. The enobs, the compound subjects, the collective nouns. Make sure you go back and review this. Make sure you know it well, and you will be well on your way toward a nice SAT writing score.